Well, Senator Stivers, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to do this for our annual sort of look back at the year and a look ahead to the next session. So I want to start off by talking about our income tax cut. January 1, going down to 3.5%, right? The original goal of this was to bring more people to the state, to make it more marketable. Is it working?
I believe so. We want to be competitive. We want to be competitive in being able to keep people here. And when they look at what we do for a income tax, they see that we're becoming more competitive with mainly states in the South, so they don't have the urgency or feeling that they need to move out. And for people who are looking for income taxes and the rates for being competitive for someplace to move to, and you're seeing that, especially in the high tax areas, a lot of out-migration of populations, Kentucky becomes one of the states that they want to inquire about. I think we've been successful in attracting some additional new populations. We are not in decline. We are a growth state.
Is the goal still to make it to zero?
The goal is, but the biggest goal is to be competitive with our overall tax structure, sales tax, income tax, property tax, but the biggest component of that of being competitive is income tax.
Now, this year, House Bill 775 was passed. I think there's been a few questions already floated over whether that will be utilized to make some smaller incremental cuts. If it doesn't happen this session, which is something you've already signaled, could it happen in future sessions?
Oh yeah, and that's the purpose, because we know as we get lower in our rates, it will be harder to move in large increments. But we still want to continue to move. We want to send the signal that we're here, open, ready for people to move to Kentucky, a competitive state from a tax structure. And so that's why we did 775 last year.
So do you think there's any chance that could happen in this upcoming session, a smaller cut?
Not likely. There's always, when you say, is it possible? There's always possibilities, but probabilities are not really there.
It's a budget year. It's always the big defining policy document. House Speaker David Osborne said that there's going to be some new questions that y'all are going to have to take on in this budget. My understanding is that COVID money is totally expired at this point. So what are those new questions y'all may have to look at?
Well, in this, we will drop from 4 to 3.5. And so we've prepared our budget based on that drop. We're going to have some things due to administration mistakes that we're going to get penalized for. And this is not something that came out of this current administration. This is something that's been in place for many administrations. We are going to have just natural increased demands on our budget. Electricity goes up, water goes up, insurance goes up, salaries go up. Nothing stays flat, but we're not going to have a lot of growth. So we're going to have to, balance that out. And then there are also some things we don't quite know because the federal government isn't quite done with some of the things they've passed. And when I say they've passed it, but the regulatory models, how they flow down to us, are still subject to their directives. And I'll give you a for instance. Let's say they do something to the Department of Education. Well, are they going to do something to the Department of Education from the perspective of, well, we're not going to cut your funds, we're just going to block grant it and send it back to the states in the same amounts, or we're just getting rid of the bureaucracy at the federal level to be able to save money? So depending on how they deal with that, then we'd have to respond to it.
Since you mentioned federal policy, I want to jump ahead a little bit because last spring I asked you about tariffs whenever that was still a kind of a new thing that was coming about, and there was still a lot of questions about it. Whenever I asked you, how long is too long before voters get tired of the wait and see for the economy to improve, you told me that you were essentially neutral on tariffs because we needed to see what our receipts were, that it was still too early. How do you feel now?
Well, there's no doubt it's hurt the bourbon industry to an extent. And when you hurt the bourbon industry, you hurt agriculture, some forest products. But that tends to be remediating itself because deals are getting worked out. Markets are starting to open back up. But it's hurt. But hopefully you're seeing, I think it was like, was it Lawrenceburg? One of the, I can't remember. One of the cities got announced because of some of the foreign taxing policies, that we got the shields and glassware for iPhones that came to one of our central Kentucky cities. And that's a benefit
Coin
of
glass,
yeah. And that was a benefit of some of the, foreign policies and what goes on with trying to repatriate international investment back to being United States investment.
One more budget question for you, and this is on the governor's budget. He'll present his proposal at the start of the year. Will it ultimately be considered in some capacity? I know that process starts over in the House, but peel back the curtain a bit on some of that process. I remember during the last budget process, the governor told me that he felt like the Senate was really open to working with him on the last budget. So what will that look like?
You asked the question of, will it be looked at in some capacity? Yeah, in some capacity. It'll be looked at. How extensive it will be, that's a good question, because it depends on what the budget he proposes is. If he has a good suggestion in there, we'll incorporate it into it. If it's not really in the direction that we think we should be going, then it will be disregarded. But I want to make this clear. Medicaid has doubled in the last 10 years. We have been able to do a lot of looking at salaries and equalization and compression issues within state government to be competitive with private sector. We've been able to reduce our pension debt. We've been able to have better bond ratings. So our fiscal health with our budget reserve trust fund is a rainy day fund, whatever you want to call it, is in by far better fiscal position because of the things we've done. And so we're not going to go in a direction that we feel is detrimental to the state and long-term fiscal health.
For people that are watching this that are not policy wonks, that don't really kind of follow how the budget process sort of works, when we're hearing in part of this interview that we're going to have to do a little bit of belt tightening, but also that we have this robust trust fund, how does it work deciding how that is spent and why state government's not just wiping out what's there?
And that's a really good point, because a lot of people don't look at it, but I try to equate it to, what's the household? What is it in your household? Every month that you're going to have generally a house payment. You're going to have an insurance payment on your car, insurance payment on your house. You're going to have your water bill, your gas bill, your electric bill, which may be different, those things, your computer cable bill, whatever they come in, those have to be paid every month. That's what we call our recurring budget. Those are the things we have to do. The recurring budget is where we are so tight because we have recurring budgets and recurring expenditures, and we have to make it equal basically what the household would be your take-home pay. What is your take-home pay, and you got to fit that all into it. Well, we do the same thing. Our take-home pay is the equivalent of tax receipts. Our expenditures are payroll, jails, state police, universities, K through 12 education. They're still expenditures, they're just different type, but we have to do it just like a household would. Now, you've got some money over here on the side you've saved up. Well, that's what we've done. We've had money on the side that we've saved up. Now we can go out and repair our roof, put a new HVAC in, buy a refrigerator, and we will spend that. But we always want to keep some in reserve because we know that there's going to be a day that there's a leak in the roof because the tree fell through it, or somebody's going to break the window because the little boys were playing baseball outside, or something happens that our concrete on our driveway cracks, and we have to repair those things. So we always keep some in reserve, but now we have enough money to go out and do the repairs and do the strategic investment to make our house more efficient and more profitable.
So I want to ask about some other session priorities for next year. What do you think the big items are going to be? What do you think may still be left over from last session?
Well, naturally, we're going to look at the budget. The budget's the ultimate policy document. What we're going to do through higher ed, what we're going to do K through 12, what we're going to do in Corrections, Justice Administration, Cabinet for Health and Family Services, which is Medicaid, social work, all those things. Those are all going to be on the table. And by what we do in the budget will be our policy statements. I think a couple of other things you're going to look at. Naturally, energy is just a huge issue right now. It's probably the biggest global energy or biggest global issue that we're having this discussion. I don't know when we're here if you're using AI to produce part of this, but anybody that used their cell phone today has used artificial intelligence, and the demand for that. And there's really only two countries that can establish the platforms, us and China. And we don't want to be behind the curve and subservient to China. So we're going to have a lot more energy in this nation to be able to do the technological changes. We're going to look at housing. You got to look at housing, and it's different in every place in the state. You're going to have different housing needs in Louisville than you are in Eastern Kentucky or far West Kentucky. We're going to be into child care, but we think it should be child care, much like the housing issue, that should be predicated on the needs of the area for which that we're trying to provide it for. And then this whole regulatory process, we need to be able to create the dynamics and just then get out of the way of the private sector, because the private sector does it so much better and more efficient that we'll be looking at a lot of regulatory systems in the state.
So I have follow-ups to ask on all of those, so bear with me.
Okay.
First, I'll at least ask about housing, because that's something that you all have signaled proposals around incentivization and deregulation. At this point, is there any idea what those proposals may look like? Are they going to be individual a la carte items, or could you expect some sort of big omnibus this year?
It could be a combination of several, and a lot of times you get an omnibus bill that then there's another idea that comes into it that either gets incorporated or is freestanding by itself. But let's look at what a lot of people may have looked at in Lexington with what we would call the Transy project. Well, that got all the infrastructure up to the property, and so now that makes it more conducive for the builders and contractors to build on the property. So we got up to it and then let private sector deal with it from there. Same thing in it was in and around, I think, some of the high mountain, high land housing that was done in Eastern Kentucky. Part of that was in response to the floods. You know, private sector came in and Craft Philanthropies, the coal company, can't think of their name, that donated the property. They put up 54 houses this past year. You know, some of the governmental things got up there and they haven't gotten any started in that same area. So Western Pocahontas was the company that put up the land. But, you know, a couple of private sector donations, some monies to assist them in getting the infrastructure built to those areas, public-private partnership up until that area, up until that time, then the local community, and they've sold a lot of those houses. People have moved. We've got them housed. They got 54, I think, started this year. They're going to do that many or more next year. Some of the governmental programs, they're still in their infancy. So that's where we need to give them the assets and resources and get out of the way. But it depends on the region of the state you're in.
On energy, I know you're the big energy guy in the Senate. So first, I want to know, have we started seeing some results from the executive order on coal that was signed a little earlier this year to help meet some of that increased demand? And then, you know, what is changing the overall demand for more energy? Is it just the data centers, or is there something more there?
No, look, first of all, if you sign a piece of legislation today, and I'm gonna go back, I always like to use the bourbon industry. You know, you didn't see the impacts of the tax codes and the Tourism Development Act immediately after those came into place in 13, 14, and 15. But now you look at the Bourbon Trail and you see what it's grown to. It's huge. 2 million visitors coming to this, but it incrementally grew. Same thing happens with the policy the president signed into law. It takes a while for that seed that's been planted to germinate and grow. And so I think you're starting to see some of it come to fruition. It's going to take some help from us because we've got to streamline some of the permitting process and some of the restrictions that are governmental restrictions on dealing with fossil fuels, but also any type of siting, any type of regulation with any energy production. You know, if you believe in wind and solar, even those entities are having a hard time getting them developed because of restrictions of the regulatory process. So we're moving that way, and I think what you will see as we go on, a greater infusion of domestic energy. and that will equate to at least stabilized prices in the market. And it's much like gasoline. Gasoline has gone down. Why? Because you've put more gasoline on the market. You've gotten more drilling, you've gotten more processing, and then more delivery. And when you have, supply and demand, plenty of supply satisfies the demand, the cost goes down. And so it will take some time, but it's moving in the right direction.
As we continue on that path, how do we keep energy costs low, especially if we're bringing in some of these big players here?
Yeah, so be it a Nucor Steel or a Logan Aluminum or a Meta, a Google, those high-end users of base load, that's what they call it. The key there is what a lot of the companies are doing that provide the energy, be it a rural electric co-op or KU, Duke, whatever. They're looking at policies, what they talk about cost allocation. So if you're here as a residential consumer, you don't want to pay for new generation or new grid infrastructure. That grid infrastructure is that power line that that goes into that plant. Well, that's what's called cost allocation to the entity that needs the new demand. Have that cost allocation to them for creating that new demand from a generation standpoint and the grid capacity that has to be built in, then that doesn't get pushed on the residential consumer. And then you have a bigger end user, which should, if not decrease, at least stabilize the rates, because you've created a bigger base to spread other fixed costs over.
Is there any concern in some of these communities if they're considering a data center? Because I think this happened in Oldham County, where you may have residents saying, "Well, not
my backyard."
Yeah.
Right. Well, and look, I'm going to be real clear. The people who did that, I know who they were. I know the players in this field, and they weren't really linked to the major players, a Meta, a Google, an Amazon. You just take. They weren't linked. They were speculator developers. And they wanted to go out there and say, hey, if we do this in this community, can we then catch a big fish that has a multi-billion-dollar investment? To my knowledge, they had no support from the big commercial people that are doing that. And if it's done right, and you look at it, it will be an economic tax boom for the community. Education, school boards, public infrastructure, jobs, tax base for property taxes. It will be a real boom for them if it's done by the right people. But you can't have the OC company, which was Oldham County Company, coming in and being basically speculative developers. That's all they were.
All right, well, let's move on to childcare now. And I specifically use the term childcare because I'm recognizing there's this larger umbrella of childcare where pre-K sort of sits in it. You said at the caucus retreat to me last week that you'll make good policy but not be influenced by political arm twisting. So what is the good policy here? I know in previous discussions we've talked about local options and options for people overnight and over weekends and so forth.
Yeah, that's, when we sit here, I just saw this in one of my counties, in Alsea County. They had I think it was a 42 slot daycare. There wasn't any healthcare violations. It just wasn't the correct forms hadn't been filled out, and they shut it down. And I couldn't understand that, because all they should have done is say, oh, here, get these right forms, get the right licensure, and you can proceed. But they had developed a healthcare or a daycare system there that really fit the needs of Alsea County. Same thing happened in Winchester, where the school system came together and they used one of their old schools and retrofit it, and a lot of the business entities came in and around to help supplement it to defer the cost of daycare. And those were based on the second shifters that are going in at night that may need that, the extended worker that needs it to 6 o'clock, the people who are on the weekends, the people who work through the holidays, the people who work in the holiday season but not necessarily on the holidays, because the school systems are shut down during those times on the fall breaks, the spring breaks, and summer vacations. So it's fit towards the working everyday 365 day a year worker, not to a school year schedule. And so different communities have been able to develop that, and there's some good examples, and that's what we need to make sure we help and assist do in the realm of daycare. We don't disagree on the need of daycare. What we disagree is on the delivery of daycare.
So how likely are we to see something happen in this session? The last budget session, 2 years ago, Senator Carroll tried to bring forward his proposal, and it didn't make it to the finish line. And in the 2 years since, we've just continued to hear this issue be hit on, not just by the governor, but you've also seen different chambers of commerce, the education commissioner, all have word about it.
Yeah, and Danny's had a huge price tag on it, and that was our biggest problem, a recurring price tag. It wasn't a one-time, I think it was $300 million. It was a recurring $300 million. And Danny understood that, but he had been in that realm and he had provided that, but he was a private sector provider. And he's one that would tell you that if you go certain routes, you'll basically squeeze out private sector providers, which then limit you on the second shifts, weekends, and that holiday, what I'll call holiday, school year breaks that the governor keeps proposing on this universal pre-K, which it's interesting to know these letters of supports, because many of the people who signed the letters of supports said, hey, we got a call from the governor's office and they're wanting us to sign this letter of support. We really don't want to do it, but we really don't want to get crossways with the governor. Therefore, what should we do? And I said, go ahead and sign it. Don't get crossways with them. We know what you're saying. You've called it. And if I'm just one of 38, I'll bet virtually every one of my members got those types of calls from either school boards or businesses or chambers of commerce.
You think the issue's become too politicized?
I don't. I think what we're trying to do is look at a policy. We're not trying to politicize it. We're not trying to run on anything. What we want to do is create economic opportunity. Part of that economic opportunity is doing what Toyota did, but they're big enough to handle it, to create a daycare system that fits those employees that work at Toyota.
So if y'all reach a solution, either on this or maybe some other policy that is bipartisanly supported, which I would argue is probably about 80% of what y'all pass.
More than that.
Does it matter who takes the credit?
I don't care. I got enough things on my wall. I don't need any more plaques on my wall. I've been in here for a while, but we don't care who takes the credit on this. We want good daycare for whatever situation it fits. And so I don't see many of us walking out saying, hey, we're going to have a press conference on really great daycare. What we want to do is have press conferences that we're creating more jobs. That's part of the equation.
Before I move on, though, there have been a few instances where it does at least seem, outside looking in, that there is some frustration with the executive branch over the issue of who deserves the credit for what. And there's a myriad of different business agreements or different policy. I could look at the past year where there just seems to be some sort of frustration. Can you speak to that?
Well, I don't think it's frustration. It's part of the process,
Is it just politics?
It's process. I don't want to say it's, politics. People want to know that their government is delivering for them. You can sit there and say, yeah, you got 52% of the vote, and that's a mandate. Well, if that's a mandate, I've got 32 out of 38. That's about 83% of the vote. That's a mandate. So people are rewarding us because they think we're doing the job that they want done. We're reducing taxes. We're providing educational and economic opportunity for them. So we're firmly in control of the policymaking process.
Now I want to ask about a few national issues, and I'll start with the ongoing hemp debate, because our Kentucky lawmakers are key players in this. What do you want to see happen around that policy, and do you have any role to play in advocating to any particular lawmaker on your stance?
Well, here's the thing about the hemp debate. Right now, it is controlled because of a federal issue. Not a lot we can do with that. We can encourage, we can call, we can talk, but we can't pass policy because of the federal preemption. I'm not a big fan of hemp. I don't think it's all that much of a silver bullet, but I think it's going to happen. So if it does happen, we need to have the best policy in place at the federal level and the state level. Do we want hemp being sold to teenagers in infused water? No, I don't believe so. What's the right mechanisms for labeling? How should it be dispensed? Those are the things you have to think through if it happens, and that would be more of a state type of issue. But right now, we don't have that ability because it's going to be phased out because of the recent amendments that got filed to various bills.
I've already asked you about tariffs, so I'll ask you next about elections. So traditionally, the midterms swing away from the party in power. Current polling would suggest that that's the direction Congress is heading in November. What does that mean for Kentucky Republicans?
Not much. The one thing it may do is if, and it's a long way. Everybody likes to prognosticate as what's going to happen. This is December. What's going to happen in November of 26? Oh my gosh. The political landscape could change 2 weeks from now. And so you don't know what's going to happen. But if it stays, as you say, the pundits are projecting, the only thing that would mean for the congressional delegation here is not loss of seats, but loss of influence. They're still going to, fully believe Thomas Massey is going to be Thomas Massey, and Hal Rogers is going to be in Hal Rogers' position, and we'll have a new seat in the Lexington area that's being vacated by Andy Barr. But Jamie Comer's going to be where Jamie Comer is, and Brett Guthrie's going to be where he is, and Morgan McGarvey, as our lone Democrat, is going to be where he is. It's not going to change. The Senate is not going to change. I think that's pretty much what all the pundits say. It's just a good year in the Senate to be a Republican because of the states that are up based on the rotation. But for the House, it would not mean anybody losing their seats. It would just mean reduced influence if the Democrats take control of the House.
Is redistricting on the table at any point in the session?
I don't believe it to be, and this is why. I've been here a while, Bode, 29 years, and I remember what the Democrats did. And a lot of people don't like to talk about what the Democrats did back then, but they created that first district almost as it looks now that Jamie Comer has. And they took it around and they looped it up below Bowling Green and ran it up towards Franklin County because they wanted to get rid of Hal Rogers in the 5th Congressional District. They took some of his counties and put them in the 1st and the 2nd and kind of created that odd-looking redistricting plan in the far west in an attempt to beat him. Well, they weren't successful because they pushed him further east into the old 7th. Well, the old 7th was lost because of population loss. So he won. Ron Lewis and Ed Whitfield now had enough Republicans in the 1st and the 2nd district that they won both of those. So instead of wiping out the Republican Party, they basically reinvigorated it in 1992. And so you got to be careful when you do that, because if you're looking, and this is political, of taking the Louisville heavy concentration of Democrats and trying to disperse it into strongly held Republican districts, you may put enough Democrats in some of those districts that it did just exactly what it did in the reverse in 1992. Actually, I think it was 1994. But that's what happened in 94 after the 92 redistricting. And so you got to be real careful what you ask for. Yeah, you can get it, but you may actually wind up empowering a base, and diluting your base to where you lose seats instead of gaining seats.
So I asked that question, partly out of curiosity for Representative McGarvey's district, but also out of curiosity for the 6th district, to go back to the previous question we were talking about. Like you said, November 26th is a long way away. What do you think about the race in that district? You said before it's a +9 Republican district, but it really depends on turnout.
That's right. All things equal, it's an off year, so there's not nearly as many people running or are going to go to vote, except there are local elections, which a lot of the local elections can basically generate turnout for the federal elections, which in a presidential year, it's the presidential year that drives turnout for the locals. So it's just reverse. But all things equal, Republicans should hold that. It's a R9 district, so all things equal, a Republican will win that by 9 points.
So what about the Senate race? How do you feel about any of the messaging that you're hearing in the primary?
Well, I think you look at the polling data, and I think it's early. I think it's, a lot of people aren't really focused on it. Let's get into February when everybody gets past the New Year's and the filing deadlines are over. Then you'll see kind of what the sentiment is. It doesn't appear that Nate Morris is getting a lot of traction. Every poll I've seen shows him in single digits. The bigger race appears to be between Andy Barr and Daniel Cameron. Both of them have by far more years of experience and by far more regional and statewide name recognition. So that appears what the race will be between. Is there going to be a fourth person, fifth person, sixth person jump into it? Who knows? But that will solidify more shortly after the filing deadlines, and you'll see who the race is going to be between. On the Democrat side, at this point in time, I don't think they have a viable statewide candidate in the race.
Well, at least in the Republican primary, have you decided if you're going to endorse anyone?
Not until I see who the field is. You don't know who may jump in it. It may be somebody in the state Senate jumps in it. I don't know, but I'm not going to say anything until we see who the field is.
So you don't think it's set yet?
No, it's not. But
Not
that
until we're
doesn't
past the
mean
filing deadline.
not till somebody else may jump into it. This may be the field, but it's definitely the possibility of somebody else getting into it could happen.
Gotcha.
And we've seen that. We just in the past couple of days on the Democrat side, you've seen the Charles Booker, and you've seen the horseman that
Dale Romans.
Dale Romans, who among the Central Kentucky people and Louisville people in the horse industry is fairly well known.
Well, that was the last, I guess, political question. Well, these are still sort of political going forward, but
Sure
the
they
rest of
are.
this,
You
I
mean
wanna-
you're not going to give me another political question?
Well, I want to ask a bit more about your future and the future of Kentucky Republicans. You've been Senate President since 2013. It's a significant part of your career. A Stivers-Osborne-controlled legislature will not last forever, and I'm not expecting
That's
it
true.
to end soon. But at this point, are there different things that you may have to be weighing now to determine if you're going to continue in leadership?
Are you trying to push me out?
No.
Okay. No, you're true. Look, and the political pendulum swings. For 90 years, it was swinging on the Democrat side with a speckling of Republicans in and here and there, but now it's primarily swung to the Republican side with specklings of Democrats here and there. So how this goes, time will tell. How long is too long? Your caucus will speak to you, your constituents will speak to you. But what I will say about David Osborne and myself, it's not about David Osborne and myself, it's about the people who we work with. Be it the Damon Thayers, the David Givens, now the Max Wises, Robbie Mills. We have the same philosophical goal. Same thing with David Osborne. We may disagree with how to get there, but David Osborne and Steve Rudy and Jonathan Schell and the group that came before, we know where we want to go. We're going to get there. And I think if you look at what we've done in stabilizing the pension systems, getting a really good budget reserve trust fund, because when I was here beginning, we'd be lucky if we had $50 million. Everybody's going to say that's a lot of money to the individual, but when you're talking about $15 billion, that's pennies on $100. So we've done a really good job of creating a lot of economic policy, a lot of economic dynamics. Education attainment levels are going up. We're being more responsive about more people in K through 12, but also higher ed. You look at the enrollment, retention, and graduation rates. All of those things are going up, and it's been based on the policy we're doing. There will be a time, and that time for me, because I can't be here another 29 years, is much shorter than the time I've been here. And that decision will be made, and it'll be a time to leave.
As you look ahead to the future, is there any concern over maintaining GOP unity? Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell are two very different type of Republicans. You're hearing the term rhino, Republican in name only, being thrown around a lot more, at least on the federal level. You've seen this rift between President Trump and Representative Green. He's also not been a big fan of Representative Massey. I could continue listing examples like that. Are you seeing change internally in the party?
No, this has always been there, and so you have people that are, I would say, more fiscal conservatives, social conservatives, libertarian conservatives, and at the end though, there's a certain strand of thread that everybody kind of agrees on: less government, lower taxes, let the individual chart their path and course. And so, yeah, I mean, has the president always gotten along with Rand Paul? No, I'd say he probably gets along with Rand Paul worse than he does Senator McConnell, but that ebbs and flows, and there's always friction. There's different types of friction, but it all comes out in the wash at the very end.
That was the last hard question I had for you, but I want to at least end on something a little bit light, which is Speaker Osborne says that you don't watch a lot of TV, that you're a reader. So as we wrap this interview up, I'm wondering if there's a book recommendation you have as we go into the new session, or maybe for this particular time of year, something you'd share.
I am not a book reader. I am a voracious reader of periodicals and articles. I'm sitting here looking at Angela and my staff and other ones. They're subject to get an article from the New York Times at 3 o'clock in the morning because I'm up reading something like that. Occasionally they'll respond to me at that time. But that's, to me, there are certain things, you read, but to be effective in this job, you got to stay up with current events. And so I'm constantly reading periodicals, be it on the internet or paper style, more on the internet. But no, I'm not a book reader.
Stay informed. That's still good advice. All right. Thank you so much, Senator Stivers.
All righty. Thank you.